Hello, this is Stephanei Stone, and today we're doing our lesson on the anti-war movement. Before we start, let's have a quick review on point of view and context. This will be a major part of our lesson today, so we want to make sure we understand it fully. First, we have point of view. This is analyzing how the author has written the text and how that influences the meaning. Next, we have context. This is using how the author has written the text to find meaning, biases, and limitations. Let's get started on the overview of our lesson. This lesson will have 3 objectives, each with an activity at the end. And then at the very end of our lesson, we'll have an assessment to show your full understanding. For our first objective, we will have students who will be able to explain what is happening to set the stage for the anti-war movement. Second, students will be able to explain the violence that happened during riots. And finally, students will be able to apply events from the past to movements in the present. Now, let's get started on our first objective, setting the stage for the anti-war movement. First, we're going to talk about demographic. This movement was made mostly of college students. It actually originated at UC Berkeley. As the movement picked up, many Democrats were part of this protest. Now, why was this movement started in the first place? Well, when the US got involved with the Vietnam War and helped the bombing of North Vietnam, many young adults were concerned with maintaining the peace in our nation. A majority of adults were part of the hippie movement, and this movement was all about peace and love. Now that you know the beginnings of this movement, let's get started with our first activity. This should be done in around 20 minutes. With the link provided to you at the bottom of this slide, I want you to write a 3 to 5 sentence paragraph about what is going on in the picture. I want you to include point of view and context of the picture in your paragraph. Great job on that activity. Now let's move on to the second objective, which is being able to explain some of the violence that occurred during these riots and protests. Most protesters advocated for peace, but some of these protests led to violence on both the side of the government and the protesters. One of the more famous protests happened in 1967. It went from the Lincoln Memorial to the Pentagon. When the protests reached the Pentagon, they were met by US Marshals and military. This led to hundreds of arrests, and it sparked a major popularity in the movement. This was when Martin Luther King Jr. spoke out about his opposition for the United States' role in the war. There were also things that the protesters did that sparked violence. They burned down ROTC buildings, and they even forced school cancellations. Now, let's move on to activity 2. This should take you about 30 minutes. For this activity, you're going to open up a document and create a poster that you might see in one of these protests. Somewhere on the poster, include a 1 to 2 sentence fact on the violence that might have taken place during a protest. On another page, write a 3 to 5 sentence blurb on the context and point of view of your poster. Be sure to use the source provided, and if you choose, you can use another source off the internet, but don't forget to cite it. Great job on that activity. Now it's time for our final objective, objective 3, which is applying events from the past to movements in the present. In present day, the anti-war movement is not that active, but the ideology stands strong in many movements today. For example, we have the climate change movement. Many young adults are using their voices to attempt to change the way the government handles climate change. Movements from the past, such as the anti-war movement, have taught those in the future and even today to speak out about issues that they want to change. Now for our final activity. This should take you about 30 minutes. I want you, with the link provided in the slide, to read the article about a professor who was in one of the anti-war protests. And then you're going to write a paragraph about a movement you want to be an activist for, why, and how you would do it. Make sure you include context and point of view of your sources. Also, explain why your sources are credible. Alright. Awesome job! You've completed all of the activities. Now it's time for your assessment project. You'll be creating a Venn diagram of the anti-war movement and the movement you picked in activity 3. You should have 5 differences in each section and 4 similarities. Don't forget to cite your sources and explain why they are credible. Alright, you have reached the end of the lesson. This is the final slide, and it's the sources that I use to create this lesson. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned a lot.